Hello and welcome to my first episode on this new initiative that I have for myself. Um, and this podcast series that I'm making, I'm going to call Raw and Real. Um, it's um, it's going to be deep conversations about controversial topics, mostly controversial topics that aren't addressed properly in what I see people address today that have podcasts or speak about these topics, but need to because over time I've learned that what I'm all about, in essence, if I kind of boil it down to what is my path, it's about being raw and real and authentic in what I present and who I am, and about speaking up with that. Because I've seen that so much of society does not, and we all know this, right? We all know this, but so much of society does not speak up. They're living in fear, essentially. And I know what fear is in the deepest, most intimate, most vulnerable sense of the word. I know what it's like to live in suppression and in fear. And that's exactly why this is, for me, personally, for me, is a very good thing to do, is to practice showing up and speaking up. I think it's one of the most fundamental things that people can do. And so this is the first episode of this Raw and Real. And for this first episode, I have I don't know how this will go, honestly. And I also want to delineate or bring forward as much of myself in that raw and real way as possible. But it's not just about being raw and real. I have great difficulty bringing what is raw and real in a context that is in in a container that is nicely packaged. I don't mean that to be sweet and loving, but I mean that it lands with you as my potential audience listening to this, but that it also is easy to understand, follow along, is open, is vulnerable, is intimate, is heartfelt and loving enough that it brings, just like making a cake, the right ingredients across to make that cake perfect. And if you bake a cake and you forget to add the sugar, the cake may look perfect and you won't see anything when it's done, but it won't taste very good, right? Because you're missing ingredients in that cake, in this case, the sugar. And it's sometimes these invisible things, just like that sugar that you can't see in the cake if you look at it on the outside. It's these invisible qualities that we bring to the table through our expression, in this case being raw and real, that matters. And it's a discipline, it's a practice, and it doesn't have to be perfect, and it can be messy, and it, as we all know it. But it's important that, for me, this is an embodiment of practicing doing this to you, but for you and for me as well, it's a practice of doing that everywhere in life. Because if everybody did that everywhere in life, we'd be in a completely different world. And it is not really that difficult. It's actually quite simple, but it's just not really easy, especially not given the tensions and the pressures and the expectations in our society today, right? And so I don't know where these conversations will go and how I will unfold them and what the episodes will be about. And I may go in and out of topics. And it may not always make sense, because I just want to speak my unfiltered truth, but in a way that I take care and I ensure that what I say has value without trying to make it have value, right? Because I'm not going to force needing to be of value. I just want to speak my mind, speak my truth, speak my heart, really, speak my truth. And so maybe to dive in here on the first episode, because I do want to bring a real topic to the table when I have the inclination to make an episode. So what I see in the world today that isn't being addressed, even by many healers and teachers and spiritual coaches and guides and awakeners and energetic beings and all of this, is that we are in a place in the world today that many people, even on the spiritual awakening journey, don't fully recognize. Is there is a counterbalance of the forces of light and dark in the world today. And many people choose not to see that, which is, fine. And many people choose not to focus on it because they lose themselves in it and they enter into fear that I was speaking about at the start of this episode. So that may be what this episode is about, fear. And yet it's there. And what do I mean by dark and light? Because it's an abstract concept. Well, how I define dark and light in this context is there's the forces of the intention of good, and there's the forces of intentions of not alignment with the truth of the moment, the forces of misinformation, disinformation, the forces of evil intent, hurtful, manipulative, deceptive, controlling, egoistically driven, self focused, harmful to self and other, consuming, taking, needing, wanting. Now, of course, some of those are also good aspects of our human lives. It's not that wanting and needing is bad, because we need to let go of these judgments and we need to get to the nuances. But it's about the underlying state of consciousness and the intent from which they're being used that is either in alignment with the purity of the truth of the good, or it's in alignment with some other force that isn't the embodiment with the intent of good. And then it falls out of that category. Now, we can go into what is good and what is bad, and we can go into the intent, and we can go into, is there even such thing as a higher power? Is there God and all of that? And trust me, I've had much of that critical discussion within myself constantly, but it becomes a mind-based conversation at some level. It's about the heart feeling the truth, and anybody that hears truth can feel in their system that it will resonate when it's brought from an open and vulnerable and real place. And that's ultimately the force of good in ourselves and in our lives and everywhere. But this is not necessarily what is being practiced in much of our society. And that is a problem when it affects most of humanity and they become unconscious of the fact that this is happening, and they lose access to their power. And what do I mean with power in this case? I mean their sense of clarity of who they are, their realization, their self-realization of who they are, their clarity of mind, their open heart in feeling themselves and the space and others around them, their willingness to align their intent with higher truth of good, good intentions, open-hearted, truthful, heart-loving intentions. And as a result, this humanity, when they're not connected to those aspects, becomes, in effect, a doorway through which darker influences control, knowingly or unknowingly, their essence, like a puppet on the string, which affects other people, and it becomes this sticky, slimy, needy type of energy that I know all too well, and I could speak about on a personal level, which will happen someday, but not now. Too much deviation from all these topics right now. But I see that happening everywhere, and it's not new, but it's like this dance of light and dark doesn't fully get recognized by people that don't see things that way. And this is why my perspective isn't per se the truth of what is happening, but it's my perspective on how I see what is happening. And it's not for you to be convinced or be persuaded. I hate convincing and persuading other people. I've given up on that, honestly, and we can talk about that as well someday. But it's about offering a perspective that may help you become more conscious, because ultimately the solution to all our problems collectively as a society, as a world, as an individual in this world, all comes down to, can we, as cliche as that may sound in the spiritual community, but it does come down to, I think it does come down to, can we awaken ourselves to a higher level of consciousness from which is a symptom, which is a sign of intelligence, a higher level of conscious intelligence from which we can oversee a greater picture from which all these problems exist, that some of them may not need to be solved, some of them may need to be left alone, some of them need to be actively addressed, but that we can oversee in our own lives and in our collective lives together as a world, that things need to go differently, that the solutions are different than how we saw them from a lower level of conscious perspective, where we didn't see those solutions. We were not separating and distinguishing ourselves, like we weren't able to see the forest from the trees, you know? And that requires different perspectives, higher level perspectives, perhaps. And I hope also with this podcast, from myself to you, to bring forward some of these perspectives that help you get more clear and more awakened at a higher level and more conscious of yourself and have more clarity and be able to share more of who you are and be more opinionated. Often in the world today, we think that we should become less opinionated and we should not say much. But in a way, that's true. Again, it's nuance, right? It's all about nuance. In a way, that's true. We shouldn't have opinions from our mind about everything. It just distracts and dilutes our clarity, and it scatters us and it confuses us, and it creates, we see that in social media, right? Everybody has an opinion about everything, and it becomes this massive sewer almost of all these people with all these opinions and hate speech and all that. That's not per se what we want more of, but I think what we do want, and what you may also want for yourself, is more clear and concise, heart-based, truthful, higher perspective-based opinions on things that help and are nourishing and supporting to other people based on the energies that they give to other people, that they bring to others. And I've had my big share of problems with that, because I will talk about that as well another time. Because of going in exactly the opposite direction of showing up towards you, towards other people, based on my own issues. But let's come back to the topic of fear. Yeah. Let's take a moment and a breath, because I'm speaking a lot here and I feel like I have so much to say that and this is a practice for me. Slowing down is important. Take a breath. What do I want to say next? See, I've always found it really difficult to be with that kind of stillness, especially in connection with others, because then I feel like I need to fill it in with information, or I need to share something, because I don't want to feel what happens in the feeling level of not saying anything. Yeah. So fear. Fear is the cornerstone of this dark energy in the world, dark intent, to take a foothold, to have grasp control, to grasp control over the goodness of you, the goodness of people, the innocence. When I say innocence, it's also the purity of open-minded, unconditional love that a child has, that doesn't realize, that is gullible, believable, open, doesn't understand that there are even people or consciousnesses that have different intentions. And I have very good friends and people around me that I see over and over again, because it's also my path, and I see it in others because I have it very much myself as well, that find it incredibly difficult in this continuous densification of life, with all of this overwhelm and chaos and stress, to master these dynamics and stay on track with themselves in a path, on a corridor, in a path of goodness for themselves, without deviating too much or slipping or falling away from that path because of forces that are sometimes perceivably beyond their control, that happen, right? We all have these situations that happen in life. But the core of it is that what I see again and again as a nugget of wisdom that I want to bring across here is that it's difficult to do good and to stay on the path of what's good for you when there's certain things, certain areas of your life from your heart that you can't consciously feel very well. When things happen in the external circumstances, you're drawn and pulled out to external circumstances, and you often are too late in realizing, hey, did I want this to happen? Did I want to go, for example, a situation with a friend of mine, did I want to go to this dentist that actually did a procedure on me that I didn't want to happen, but it was overwhelmed in the moment, and the decision was made to do it without my consent, and it happened, and it violated my boundaries because I didn't have a say, and where was my free will in this? And it has consequences now that it felt like abuse, because the situation unfolded that shouldn't have happened, And then afterwards, I get the anger from the dentist when I complain, or the practitioner, or whoever it is. This is a particular situation that I'm referring to. And then it's happened again, just like the pattern in my life where that keeps happening, and I don't seem to have control over these things, that these mishaps, these situations that take advantage of me, and they shouldn't have happened, but they did. And I wasn't even aware of it when it started to happen. That's the point I'm referring to. We need to take back our feeling. That's the most important thing. If I can share from my own perspective, the most important thing that I've learned, that I don't see many practitioners and healers help with. And I've been with many of them. If they don't help you connect to a deeper level of feeling yourself and feeling the feeling potential of your life, the open-hearted, letting in love, allowing the feelings to strengthen, the clarity of knowing what you want through the heart of feeling. If that isn't promoted, increased, strengthened with the right intent, again, the goodness of the light side of life, the right intentions come from feeling, come from the heart, come from love. If that isn't strengthened, it's a very, very slippery slope, and it's a questionable approach to healing, to helping you further on your path. Because that is the core of life. It's feeling more from the heart and opening lovingly, compassionately to that. Now, let me define that further, because when I say love, it's a very abstract concept that even many people in the spiritual community, as far as I'm concerned, do not interpret it very well. Because in this example I just shared with you about this dentist, right? I strongly embodied the energy of anger to this friend of mine who was in that situation, but not to him, but as an example of how he should be feeling towards the pattern that he is attracted to happen to him again, from the place of being a victim, of being taken advantage of by an authority figure that was a representation of what he's experienced again and again and again in his life, in a similar way as his family system and his mother specifically went through as well. Now, that's a very advanced perspective, and I don't expect you to understand it, and I'm not going to unpack all of it here. But this is the dynamic that he was in. And it requires, it's an example for me as well, and it's an example for many people in the world as well. So I'm not saying that, I only know because I have similar patterns as he has, but I'm just a bit further down the road, so I can with clarity embody and be it for him, so he can elevate himself to that level of understanding and feeling, so that he can take his power back, which is essentially what he has lost in that place. And that is an act of self-love. That's what I mean by love. And love is, in that case, not being nice, being kind, offering space, letting the situation unfold, hoping for the best, trusting that things will go well, which a lot of spirituality is about, right? All of that. That's not love in this case. Love in this case, for him, in this situation that I'm describing, would be to let his anger set very clear boundaries to this specific person that is manipulating him into not admitting that they did something wrong, not taking responsibility for their actions, and putting the blame on him, letting him suffer the consequences of their actions to him, and him falling into fear and losing himself in that situation and being taken advantage of yet again. And so standing up against that and saying, I'm going to take action and I'm going to say no with clarity to this situation. I'm going to describe in detail what that situation is, and I'm going to present my problem, and I'm going to claim what it is that I deserve, which is compensation for that situation. That's the material piece in life. And I may go as far as to whatever the next steps are, right? Now, as you can tell, that winds me up because I see it happen. I've seen it happen one too many times everywhere to people that are victimized, and especially the people that are in the weakest positions or that think that they're in the weakest positions, because often we're in that backed in that corner where we don't have much in the external world to rely on or to depend on, and we think with the illusion of that darkness that takes over and that uses fear against us that we don't have any control, and the physical circumstances may seem that way and be presented to us that way. And yet, the solution to that, and the solution to fear that I want to bring to you today through this discussion, is to keep it close. It's like that old saying, keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer. Keep the fear close. What I mean by that, in specifically and nuanced again in this context, is bring your light to the fear, your clarity, your heart-based love. See it. Allow it the space within the container of seeing it separate as you, because it isn't you, but it's there nonetheless. And that light of your attention from a higher perspective, from God, that comes through you, and we can talk about that, how I see that another time, dissolves and digests, and it becomes the boundary of the darkness of that pattern. And it doesn't have control over you. It's like the bully on the playground. When there's cameras all around, and they'd only be focusing on the bully, and he knows that he's being watched, do you think he still would be the bully that he would be towards other people? Changes people, right? Being witnessed, being seen, changes the way people behave. Why? Because they're in the spotlight. They're being watched. They're being seen. And it puts that aspect of controlling dark influence under pressure, because it cannot thrive in the light. It can only thrive in the unconscious realm of the dark, where there is no feeling, where it has room to fester and grow and keep control. So the answer and the solution is love. In this case, is focusing your light on those patterns and that darkness, so that it doesn't have control, right? And it begins over time to weaken its strength, its grip. That's the true path of awakening in that sense, right? That I stand for, in a way. I stand for it, but I'm still discovering what that means for me. But if I were to speak from the most pure perspective of what I've learned, that's what I think that awakening should be. That's what Buddha and all these people that are compassionate, loving examples of being with what is are. They're not avoiding what is. They're not fearing what is and running away from it. They're feeling more of what is and being more with what is, which is why I said in this episode, that's what any good practitioner should be helping you more towards. And if they're helping you more away from feeling more, if you're feeling more disconnected after doing any kind of work with anyone in the world, anywhere, again, that's nuanced, but if in general you start to feel bad, you start to feel less of the goodness of the truth of who you are, the real truth of who you are, then it's not a good thing. You can still use it to grow and strengthen, but it's a rather brutal, hard path that I followed for many years. And it made me resentful and angry and disappointed and mistrusting, which didn't help me, which now I have to be with to elevate my level of being with it, to awaken, be with all the things I didn't want to be with, because I wanted to be away and get rid of all those negative feelings and all that horrible experience of life and all that pain and difficulty and struggle. And now I still have to be with all of it. It didn't go away. And I still fear it. But I've strengthened myself to the point where I fear less of its control over me than I did in the past. So I've grown. That's the path. So for now, this is a very beautiful episode. I loved having spoken this until here. I think it's about half an hour. I think that's a good time. I don't want to make this too long. But I do want this to be, hopefully, I would like this to be helpful to you. But in any case, it was helpful to me to be able to share this. So I look forward to seeing you on raw and real, deep conversations about controversial topics that aren't addressed properly but need to. Episode 2, soon. Bye-bye for now.